A bit of a different video today, but it still involves yarn, so don't worry. One of my goals, the only other goal, I have 2 goals, knitting goals and this goal. So my main goal aside from my knitting goals is to get back into reading again. I love reading. As a kid I was always reading. I won a reading competition at my local library, and I fondly remember falling asleep to Danny, the Champion of the World by Roald Dahl. I still remember that tape really well, especially the scene when they're soaking the raisins. For some reason that's the one that sticks in my head the most. Anyway, but now I really seem to struggle to focus on a book. I don't know, it's kind of like I should be knitting, I should be crocheting, I should be doing something else rather than just sat reading. Because of that, I've recently discovered like the magic of audiobooks. Before I was like, they're not proper reading, but they're really proper reading. Especially when you get a good narrator, because it's like, it's better than you reading it because they do such a good job with the characters and everything else. So how is this yarn, you ask? So because I'll mostly be reading audiobooks, I wanted a visual representation of the book I was reading. I do love actual books, there's just something so nice about them. I wanted a way to feel what I've read, like when you read a book you do feel as you read. It sounds so weird, but you know what I mean. I wanted something to feel what I've read and the colours to represent what I've read and all this sort of stuff. Actual books are just so pretty and I don't want to let that part of reading down. I want to like bring the prettiness into my form of art now, I guess. At first I was doing just like Instagram stories and that was just boring. I wanted this way as well because I do, well not feel, I do know I will forget the book if I don't have some like way to recollect it. It's like I used to have a dream journal and like even now from like 10 years ago I can like read my dream journal and be like, oh, I remember that dream. I'm just going to mention here, like I'm not going to make a big deal of it and I will go into it more with a book. I'm going to go into it later, but I have a memory problem because of my brain injury. So that is one of the main reasons why I had to write it down, because I just do. I have been trying to read books on and off for like basically since my brain injury like 10 years ago. I've been trying so hard to like get back into reading and I just can't focus. Like I say it's because of my knitting, but I really do think it's because of my brain. I just can't. I did read Animal Farm when I was on holiday last year, but that's a short book and I was by myself, completely by myself, like I went on holiday by myself. And that was like, I could read it then because I was on a beach and it was quiet. I did manage to read the last bit in a very touristy pub, which I was quite proud of. So that's like the only book I've read for years. It's brilliant, by the way. Everyone goes on about 1984, but Animal Farm, something else. I'm really happy I've finally discovered and enjoyed audiobooks. So I'm like, yes, I can finally read again, but in my way. And aside from like, for some reason, the memory thing is the one thing I just like hate about my brain injury. Like I just hate it. So, another reason I wanted to do this is I wanted something creative to do. Like I wanted a big year-long project, but not a temperature blanket. This is going to be a fun project because it's like a little square. After I read a book, I do a square. So it's like a really fun way of doing a blanket. I've done all my squares now, and like a couple of days ago I looked on Instagram and people are doing book blankets, but they're doing like, it's like temperature blanket. So they picked a colour for fantasy, romance, horror, fiction, non-fiction. They've picked a colour for each of those genres, but I just don't like that. I much prefer my way, it's more fun. So I wanted something creative to do. I do so often feel guilty that I don't paint anymore because I'd rather be knitting or crocheting or sewing or doing anything else. But looking at a book and picking colours to match the cover, that is very creative. And like knitting and crochet and sewing, all that stuff, like people just say it's a hobby, but it's a skill. It's a creative skill, like thinking of colours. And cross stitch is drawing with thread. So it is very, very creative and arty. People just think, oh, it's a hobby, whatever, but it really isn't. Another reason I wanted to do this is because granny squares are like, you have to do granny squares if you crochet, but I haven't. I just didn't like them before I started doing these, and I've only done 5, and I really love granny squares. So now I'm thinking, what else can I make with granny squares? I also wanted to learn how to do granny squares from memory because for me, repetition is key. So it's a fun project, but also it's a bit of like, let's test the brain. But guess what? From the 3rd square, I knew how to do it from memory. And I had a few days off and I picked up the fourth one. I had to read just one sentence. And then the fifth one I think I got it now, hopefully. There's just so many different ways to do a crochet granny square as well, but I prefer the magic loop because then you can pull it tight at the end. So the plan is I'm going to do 5 rounds of colours because I just like the way the odd colours look. Another reason why the granny square is perfect for a book blanket is because if a book is multicoloured, like it's got more than 5 colours in, I can do a separate colour on each cluster. So a cluster is 3 double crochets in the granny square. So I can do each cluster a different colour if there's so many colours I can't match, which is brilliant. And it will also look neat. I really want them all to look neat and the same size, and I didn't really understand granny squares before I started doing this, but now I'm like, oh my god, I get it. Granny squares are amazing. They're so simple, but they just look so nice. And then each month I'm going to wrap up of everything I've read, show you my squares and why I chose the book, a book review, and why I chose the colours. I'm nervous now because I've never actually talked to anyone about my reading. It's kind of like a private thing. Like all the emotions you feel. I'm like, okay, I'm going to come in and talk about all the emotions I feel about books. So I have 2 books and 3 audiobooks this month. The first one is actually a book I finished in December, but it's the one that got me back into audiobooks, thinking I need to listen to books all the time. And it is Hollywood Park by Mikel, and he's the singer of the Airborne Toxic event. I love the band, but that's not the main reason I wanted to read this book. It was a cult aspect that drew me in. So Mikel grew up in Synanon and he escaped it when he was a child. I've never read a book by someone who's in a band before. I'm not really into memoirs, especially those who are in bands, because it's like, to me that just seems boring. But like I say, the cult aspect drew me in. And true crime podcasts are pretty much the only podcasts I consume. But this book, I'm just going to hold this to represent the book, and I'll... This band is so much more than the cult though, and he only mentions his band in one chapter. Because I was listening to the audiobook, he started discussing sometime around midnight, and I was on the bus, so I paused my audiobook and listened to that song again. It hits different, that song, knowing the history behind it, like knowing the guy behind it more, and it just hits different. And no, I didn't cry on the bus. So Mikel actually read the book, and usually I'm not into writers reading their own books. I had to stop listening to 2 books because the writers were reading them, and it was like, it just didn't work. They were writers, but they weren't readers. His voice is nice and deep as well, which was quite nice to listen to with headphones in. I really felt like I got to know him, and because it was him reading it, it just felt more personal than some random narrator. Like, you really get to know him and his childhood and everything. It's really, really personal. This book was quite emotional. Yeah. There's another reason why I'm glad he read the book. I don't know if people will notice this, but there's moments where you can tell that he's smile talking. It's just like his voice lifts a little bit, and it's so lovely to listen to someone smile talking. That wouldn't happen if another narrator was doing it, like some random person. It's beautifully written. I felt engaged the entire time, and I missed the book when it had finished. So he writes really beautiful songs, like he's a very, very good songwriter. I just didn't think he would be good at writing a book, because a book compared to songs is very different. His songs are like stories, and the book was written in the same way. It was like listening to an 11-hour song, but in a good way, a song that reached me on every single level. Here we go. Here's the emotions. So this book, I've got... Even when I was a kid, I wasn't talking about books. I'd be like, yeah, it's a good book. So this book taught me about the bad and good side of love, which is something I've never really thought about before. He talks about family, life, childhood, art, death, friends, addiction, music, love, everything in such a raw way. I did find myself crying at times. Not bawling, but like tears. And then halfway through the book, I bought a copy for my brother, which I've never done before with a book. So that just says it all, really. The next book is a controversial book. So it was Flowers in the Attic by V.C. Andrews. I chose this book because it really is like an in-joke with all the true crime podcast hosts. And I just wanted to know what everyone was going on about. I knew nothing about the storyline before I read it. I just got it I didn't read it or anything. I just thought, let's just see what it's about. Let's get it and see. Don't read the synopsis, just get it and see what it's about. What a ride! In capitals. So this book has incest in it, right? And that seems to be the only thing people talk about. They look at the book and they're like, oh, it's incest. That's all it is. But like, why does no one talk about the grandmother? The mother's progression into like, what the tar, the donuts, the torture, the weird, and then there's moments where it's like really beautiful, but for some reason people just talk about the incest. But it's so much more than that. Yeah, and the mouse. I'm not over the mouse. I listened to the audiobook, which I'm glad I did, because if it was an actual book, I would not finish it. Like, it was very slow. But the narrator did such a good job. She had the voices spot on, and when it was like shocking moments, her voice changed. Her voice was like constantly changing. It wasn't flat, it was brilliant, and she did a brilliant job of narrating it. So, like, it's more than incest. It's shocking, it's sad, it's beautiful, and it's very haunting. So, the colours I chose for this are purple and red, and the black for the background of the book. And the book isn't purple and red. I chose purple and red because of the butterflies, and I'm not going to spoil it. Because of the butterflies, I chose purple and red. I was planning to do a purple and red mouse for Mickey. Before I decided to do granny squares, I was thinking I could make random squares, but I'm glad I failed at making the random square. So I was going to do a purple and red mouse for Mickey. This is my second attempt. It might look okay on camera, but it's not a square. There's parts where there's double crochets where it's not supposed to be. And the book was crazy. So these are my notes. WTAF round 6. Like, this book was just like, what am I doing? I tried 2 times. I tried writing the pattern out again. I just gave up. I was like, nope, let's just stick to granny squares. And then I made the granny square and I was like, okay, I'm glad I failed. Because as you can see, just from these two, the random colours of granny squares just go so well together, and I would never have done a granny square project if it wasn't for this book blanket, because like I say, I just wasn't into granny squares before, but now I'm obsessed with them. This is an actual book. I don't know why I'm saying that like you idiots. This is a book. I pre-ordered this thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to read it. I've read her previous book, The Butchering Art, which is like the history of surgery and germs, and Joseph Lister telling people that germs exist, and people saying, no, you're crazy. That's quite a rubbish summary. Just read the book. It's the history of surgery, and it's really, really good. So I did pre-order this, but then I did try reading it, but I just couldn't, so I got the audiobook. The audiobook was read by a very, very British man. It was a good voice. So the reason I like Lindsey Fitzharris is because since my brain injury, like, the history of medicine and surgery is like my favourite kind of history. Like, I'm obsessed with it. When I read The Butchering Art, she was doing a talk in Edinburgh in the Surgeons' Hall, and I went to go meet her, and we both agreed it was very good that I was alive in 2013 when brain surgery was a thing, because there was a lot of deaths with people having brain injuries back in the day, because, you know, you just can't open the brain without anaesthetic. So another reason why I like her is because she does biographies. So the Butchering Art is about the history of medicine and surgery, but it's also about Joseph Lister, and this book is about Henry Gillies, the man who pretty much invented facial reconstruction during the First World War and the Second World War. And just like how people didn't think Joseph Lister was right, people didn't think he was right. They thought like constructing someone's face was like vain. It's like the face is literally hanging off and you think you shouldn't be able to help them. And I've gone off on a tangent. So the reason I like Lindsey Fitzharris is because she does biographies, but they read like stories. They read so well. She really hooks you in. It doesn't feel like a biography. It kind of feels non-fiction at times, because she's very, very good at telling a story. Yeah, I really love her writing style. She's so good at telling and setting a scene. I really bonded with the soldiers in this book, because obviously it's all true. And before I read this book, and I guess like most people, we never hear about facial disfigurements during wars. It's usually like missing limbs and PTSD. No one ever talks about like jaws coming off, eyes coming out, nose falling off. There's so many, there's parts in this where someone's whole, like you can see inside the mouth, and the soldiers can't eat or drink because their mouth is blown off, and Henry Gillies like reconstructs their face. It's amazing, but no one ever talks about it. Even now, it's like, even before I read this book, I never thought about facial disfigurement. I just kind of thought limbs, PTSD. I didn't really think much about it. I'd never really thought, like I say, that faces were destroyed. But when you stop to think, of course they were. And I learnt from this book that metal caps were not a thing during the First World War for the first year. It was fabric, like flat caps. I had no idea. Mental. There was one moment in this book where I had to like stop listening, like stop reading, because it reminded me too much of my brain surgery, like for the first time in years. My brain surgery, my scar, how the surgeon who cut my head open was so careful to do it literally on my hairline and no lower. Just like Henry Gillies, who put so much thought into every cut and stitch. And despite this, the soldiers and me were still ashamed and people still stared. So this is the moment I stopped. This is about people staring. He's aware of just what he looks like. Therefore, you feel intensely that he is aware that you are aware. And I'm only showing you this tiny photograph of my scar because even though it's me, the photographs in hospital, like recovery, staples in my head, even though it's me, it's too much for me sometimes. It's too traumatic for me even to look at myself. It's like, there's me, then there's that me, and sometimes I just can't look at it. So for the colours for this, I took a photograph as I was reading it against this chair and the cushions that come with it, and oh my god, it looks so pleasing to the eye. The sewer inside of me had to resist cutting one of the cushions to make a square from that because it just goes so well. But in the end, I did these colours, and I really think the off-white represents the bandages on the cover and both inside the book. It's not a nice cream, it is like a dirty bandage, which is quite fitting. And this book's really good as well because it has photographs of the soldiers before, during and after. Very good, very good. And it is about Henry Gillies, but it goes very in depth about the war, how the war started, which country started when, and it's very historic, this book, compared to the first book. But even then, I was not bored. It's just literally history, actual history, no fiction, nothing, just like facts. But it's really not boring. It's really interesting. So yep, I would definitely give that a go. And her first book. So the next one. It's a book. Okay, let's just start with, I can't believe this is a children's book. It's terrifying. Look at this picture. What is that? How is that okay for a child? If I read that as a kid, I think I would throw it on the floor and start crying from fear. So that illustration is scary. The torture and slow murder the other mother commits, the shadows, the thing in the darkness, and the other father at the end were the most scary parts. It's scary, but it is also beautiful. The way Coraline is with the ghost children, that was my favourite part, because even though it was a very dark scene, it felt light because of how nice she was interacting with the ghost children. Like, you didn't feel scared because she wasn't scared. Through it all, like, she still remains a child. At the end, she finds out the guy with the circus is called Mr. Bobo. And it says, if she'd known his name was Mr. Bobo, she would have said it every chance she got. How often do you get to say a name like Mr. Bobo aloud? And I thought that was just so nice and, like, childish and just nice compared to the entire rest of the book. So like most people, I have watched the film many times. Unpopular opinion, I like the film better. I think with a book that is this visual, it just works better as a film. And I think it is also the stop motion style of the film. Like, it's a very beautiful film. I always forget how dark the film is as well. So they did a very good job of representing the book in the film. So the colours I chose for this aren't very Coraline-y colours. You'd think it'd be like darks and blacks. And the reason I chose black for the border, even though there's no black on the cover, is because on the cover the cat is grey, but in the book and the film he's black. So I was like, I'm going to do a black border. I also added a button. I wasn't going to at first because obviously it's a book blanket. And I was like, is that going to get in the way as a blanket? But I don't think it will. And I've also sewn the button in the same direction as, that's the direction, yeah. I've also sewn the button the same direction as that creepy drawing I showed you. Because when you think of sewing a button, you do a cross. You don't do 2 holes, 2 holes. So it's like, it's sewn in strange. That is, oh, happy nightmares tonight. So the last book I read is The Push. I can't remember who it's by, but I'll pop all the books below that I've read in case you want to read them. The reason I chose this was Bookstagram. The colours appealed to me, but more than that, it seemed to be the only storyline that stood out after an eventful day at the hospital having my ovarian cyst looked at. So I think this is what they call mood reading. It's safe to say I was in a woe is me mood. So why not make that worse by reading a book about motherhood? I thought maybe it'll just mention being a parent, but the opening page is like, oh God. It is often said that the first sound we hear in the womb is our mother's heartbeat. Actually, the first sound to vibrate our newly developed hearing apparatus is the pulse of our mother's blood through her veins and arteries. We vibrate that primordial rhythm even before we have ears to hear. I knew I'd made the perfect choice, just like how you listen to sad music when you're sad. This book was not what I was expecting. I didn't read much about it. I'm loving it. I've got like 10 minutes left on my audiobook. The raw and brutal way she describes motherhood, both the physical and the mental side. The blood, the pain, the love, the hate, the regret, the anger, the sadness, the overthinking, the mundanity of life, the comparing yourself to other mothers and so much more. It made me feel so uncomfortable at times, but in a good way, kind of. But that's when you know you've got a good book. And I really love the writing style in this, like I really love it. It's the best fiction book I've read for like years, I think. It's like the way she describes a day in the life and it's just a list and it just works really well. It's like Marley and Me, when the journalist writes his day out and it's just like da-da-da-da-da. I really like that way of writing. And I used to do a monthly roundup ages ago on Tumblr where I would just write things in that month that made me happy, and it was kind of like that. I just love that way of writing. I also love the way that Blythe calls her boyfriend husband you in her head. I don't know why. This book is so in-depth. In most books you know the characters, but in this book you get to know the character so well because of all the women that came before her and because of the way the writer is properly in her head. Like it just kind of hits in the right spots, this book. And halfway through I realised this book is more than motherhood. It's about life, death, fear, grief, mental health, trauma. And like I said, I've got 10 minutes left and I'm really going to miss it. It's really good. Very good. And the colours I chose, I prefer the hardback cover. I mean, it's an audiobook. I could just Google any cover I want to and do the colour from that. I've just realised. It's kind of the same as the hardback. The reason I prefer the hardback is because I can't stand photographs of people on books. I think it's so tacky. I think it ruins the whole book. I just hate it. The hardback colours seem delicate, like the subject of this book, and the paperback colours seem harsh, also like the subject of this book. And I've read reviews on this, and people have said, like Blythe, the main character, you don't know what to believe from her, and it's like, actually, I believe her fully. The husband's her daughter's a and yeah, I feel like Blythe is telling the whole truth, and it's like, why are people saying they don't believe her? God. I might cut that bit out. So yeah, I'm really enjoying this book, and I've only got like 10 minutes left, and I'm gonna miss this book. You know when you read a book and you're like, oh God, what do I do with my life now? It's kind of like that. So I thought I'd talk a bit about my February books, but leave some surprises. I was browsing on Bookstagram again, and I'm just going to say now, Bookstagram reels make no sense. I listen, like, I don't watch them that often, but when I do, I always turn the sound like fully down so I can't hear anything. And the reel is like this. Imagine, like, this is what you see on your phone. And it's like 6 seconds of complete silence. And then the book turns over. And it's like, that could literally be a photograph. Why is there a reel for it? Anyway, I'm going to attempt to read a physical book, 2 physical books in February. One's a short story, which I thought was perfect because you can pick it up whenever, and they're about 10 pages. You don't have to commit yourself to an entire book. The next one is a book called Tender Is the Flesh. It was a cover and the tagline that drew me in. I was like, I'm just going to buy that book. I read like 8 words from the synopsis, but I was like, there's no point reading the rest because the book cover has drawn you in completely. So, like I say, I really can't focus, blah, blah, blah. But I think because I love this book cover so much and the idea of it, I think I will be hooked. I'm going to set aside actual time to read books. I think that's my problem. I think I'm just like knit, crochet, but if I set aside actual time to read, I think I will do really, really well. And I can sit in my conservatory and it'll be nice and relaxing and, you know, it'll be good. I'll set time because I do love reading. And if I'm fully alone, I'm all alone. No, if I'm fully alone, I can read. I can't read with like even like the slightest background noise. It's so annoying. I think I'm going to stick to both audiobooks and actual reading really well because this is the first time in years that I felt this motivated and excited to read again. I've been watching other videos of what people have read and it's like, oh, I could read that. But before it was like, oh, that looks a bit long, or will I actually like read it? So I'm really excited. It's like the first time in years where I've felt really happy and I look forward to reading. There's also some other books on my list that I want to read in February, including Hitler's Canary. I've wanted to read that for so long and I recently got the Libby app. So you join a library and you get the Libby app and you add your library card number and you get free books and you get free audiobooks. So you get free digital and free audiobooks. It's really, really good. So I'm going to listen to Hitler's Canary on that. You can get newer books on there, but it's like a 6-week wait. So I could have got Tender Is the Flesh. But I was so excited, I just bought it. And like I keep checking my email. Has it been dispatched yet? And it's going to dispatch on the 7th of February. So it's like, okay. But I keep checking, which is a good sign, I think. I'm really excited. And I would love some book recommendations, please. As you can see, I like lots of kind of books. Apart from romance, I do not like romance novels. They're just so cheesy. But if there's a good one, you can feel free to recommend it if you read no romance. But yeah, please try not to. But yeah, because I'm getting back into reading, you can put a romance book if you want to, because like I say, I'm trying to get back into reading. So if it's a good book, I'll give it a go. And yep, I'll show you all my squares lined up so far. I'm not going to sew them together yet because I don't know how wide the book blanket is going to be until I read more books. I don't want to sew them together and then be stuck of where to put the rest of the squares. So I think like 3 months in, I'll be able to work out how wide or long I want it. I was going to do a square for each month, but I've got 5 squares here, which is odd. So I'm just going to see where I am 3 months in, 2 months in. It just depends how much reading I do, I guess. And then hopefully this time next year, I'll be able to read a physical book under my book blanket. And that just sounds so nice. So yes, thank you for watching, and if you are new here, like this is mainly a knitting and crochet sewing place, but if you like books, also subscribe, because like I say, I'll be doing my monthly book roundups and there's nothing better than getting book recommendations from YouTube. I've already got a few which I've got on my list to read already. So yes, and are you doing a book blanket or temperature blanket? Are you doing a yearly long project? So let me know in the comments below, I'd love to hear. I like YouTube for all the connections you make. One more thing, I'm going to block these all together, probably like when I start sewing up so they're all the same size. I do have blocking pins, but I have seen the granny square ones where you get the wood sticks to stick in each side of the granny hole so the squares are all even, so I think I'll have to invest in one of them, because to make all the effort of making the squares and for them not to be exactly the same size would just do my head in. So yes, that's my plan. If I'm reading 5 books, 5 books is quite a good start. If I read that book many, there's going to be a nice big blanket. So yes, thank you for watching, and I will see you soon for a very fun video. And I usually say knit you later, but this is crochet. Crochet you later.